In a time long ago when the skies shimmered with the glow of the stars and the land still remembered the blessings of the gods, there existed a kingdom known as Azeler. It was a kingdom blessed by the river of stars, a river that flowed not with water but with glowing specks of light. Each night, the river's surface would shimmer like 1,000 stars in the sky, lighting up the kingdom with an ethereal glow that could be seen for miles. The river was believed to be sacred, a divine gift from the gods. It was said that the stars in the river held magical properties, and those who could catch one would be granted a wish. The people of Azeler had long revered the river, and it was central to their way of life. But as with all things that are revered, it was not long before someone sought to control it. The kingdom of Azeler was ruled by King Arlen, a man once known for his wisdom and compassion, but as the years passed, the king became consumed by his own greed. Instead of using the stars to help his people, he hoarded them in the royal vaults, sealing away their power for himself. The more the king collected, the more his hunger for wealth and power grew. He believed that the stars would give him eternal life and dominion over the world, but the people of Azeler paid the price. The once fertile land began to wither, crops failed, and the people found themselves hungry and destitute. The magic of the river, once a symbol of hope, was now nothing more than a distant dream, a light that glimmered for those who could no longer reach it. The king's heart grew colder with each passing year, and the people were left to suffer under his oppressive rule. At the edge of the kingdom, by the banks of the River of Stars, lived a young girl named Zuri. Zuri was the granddaughter of Nana Marembi, an old woman known for her wisdom. Nana Marembi had raised Zuri after her parents had passed away when she was but a child, leaving Zuri with only the memories of their kindness and warmth. Nana's house was a small, humble cottage that sat by the river, and it was here that Zuri spent most of her days. She had grown up hearing the tales of the River of Stars from her grandmother, stories of magic, wonder, and the potential of the river to heal the kingdom. Zuri, though young, was wise beyond her years. She had seen the suffering of the people firsthand. Her heart ached as she watched the villagers struggle to feed their families, as children went to bed with empty stomachs and elders grew weak from hunger. Zuri often walked to the river, where the glowing stars seemed to call to her. She would kneel by its banks, her fingers brushing against the glowing water, and make a silent wish, a wish for the king to see the pain he had caused and to change his ways. But it seemed that the stars had no answer. The king remained indifferent, and the kingdom continued to fall into ruin. Still, Zuri did not give up hope. She believed in the magic of the river, and deep in her heart she knew that there was still a chance to save her people. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to twinkle in the sky, Zuri stood at the river's edge, watching the shimmering lights dance upon the water. The river was quiet tonight, as if holding its breath, waiting for something, or someone. "Please," Zuri whispered into the wind, her voice soft but full of desperation. "I wish for the king's heart to change. I wish for him to see the suffering of his people and to help them. Please, River of Stars, grant me this wish." As soon as the words left her lips, the stars in the river seemed to glow brighter, their light intensifying until it filled the night with a dazzling brilliance. Zuri's breath caught in her throat as she watched the stars swirl around her, as if answering her call. The river's magic was awakening, responding to her plea. But just as quickly as it had appeared, the light began to fade. Zuri blinked, unsure if she had truly seen what she thought she had. Was it a trick of the mind? Had the stars really responded? "Zuri?" The voice was soft like the wind itself, and it came from behind her. Zuri turned to find an old woman standing in the shadows of the trees. She was tall and thin, her face weathered by time but her eyes bright and knowing. There was something about her, an air of mystery that made Zuri's heart race. "I've been waiting for you," the woman said, her voice filled with both warmth and authority. "I am Nara, the guardian of the River of Stars." Zuri's heart skipped a beat. The guardian. The legend spoke of her, the mysterious figure who was said to protect the river and its magic. Many believed she was nothing more than a myth, a story to explain the power of the river. "But how? How did you know my name?" Zuri asked, her voice trembling. "The river has chosen you, child," Nara said, her gaze steady and knowing. "Your wish has been heard." Zuri's eyes widened in disbelief. "But I only asked for the king to change. I never expected." Nara raised a hand to silence her. "It is not the king who will change the kingdom, child. It is you. The River of Stars has chosen you to restore balance to this land. But be warned, the power of the river is not something to take lightly." Zuri's mind was spinning. "What do you mean? How can I?" "Take this," Nara said, reaching into her robes and pulling out a small glowing star. It pulsed with a soft, golden light, and as Zuri held it in her hands she felt a surge of warmth, as though the power of the river was flowing through her. "This star," Nara continued, "is a gift from the river. It will grant you 3 wishes. But be careful, for the wishes of the river come with great responsibility. The choices you make will determine the fate of this kingdom." Zuri's hands shook as she held the star, the weight of the responsibility heavy in her heart. "I don't know if I'm ready for this." Nara smiled, her eyes filled with kindness. "You are stronger than you think, Zuri. The river has faith in you and so do I." The old woman turned to leave, her footsteps silent on the soft earth. "Remember, child, the river's magic is not meant to be used for personal gain. The wishes you make must come from a place of love, compassion, and wisdom. The fate of the kingdom rests in your hands." With that, Nara disappeared into the night, leaving Zuri standing alone by the river, the glowing star still warm in her hands. Zuri sat by the river of stars, her fingers still trembling around the small glowing star that Nara had given her. The light of the star felt warm in her hands, but it also felt heavy, as if the weight of the kingdom's fate rested upon her tiny shoulders. The stars above twinkled brightly, but they seemed distant, far removed from the river below, as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for Zuri to make her first move. She stood up slowly, the cool night air brushing against her skin. The water in the river rippled with a gentle current, its usual peaceful glow now somehow more intense, more alive. Zuri's mind raced with questions. How could she possibly restore balance to the kingdom? She was only a girl. What could she do against a king so consumed by greed and power? And what about the wishes? The idea of having the power to make wishes was overwhelming, and the responsibility that came with it was enough to make her heart pound in her chest. But she knew one thing for sure: she couldn't stand idly by and watch her people suffer any longer. The river had chosen her for a reason, and no matter how unsure she felt, she had to try. Zuri took a deep breath and tucked the glowing star into the folds of her tunic. She knew that the first step on her journey was to seek out King Arlen and try to speak with him. Maybe, just maybe, if she could show him the pain his actions had caused, he would change his heart. But deep down, she wasn't sure if even the magic of the river could sway him. The path to the royal palace was long and winding, leading through dense forests and across barren fields. Zuri had made this journey before, often accompanying her grandmother to the market or to visit neighbors, but today felt different. Today she was no longer just a girl from the village. Today she was the bearer of the River of Stars magic. The weight of her mission felt as heavy as the star she carried, and with every step, her resolve grew stronger. As she walked through the dense forest, the sounds of the night grew louder, the rustling of leaves, the distant calls of owls, and the soft croaking of frogs by the riverbanks. But there was something else in the air, something that made Zuri pause and listen more intently. The wind carried a strange scent, sharp and metallic like iron or blood. It was faint at first, but it grew stronger as she pressed on, and soon the woods were eerily quiet. The usual sounds of the forest had fallen silent, as if the world was holding its breath. Zuri quickened her pace, her heart racing in her chest. Something was wrong. The forest was never this still, never this silent. She emerged from the forest and onto the open plains that stretched before the royal palace. But as she neared the palace gates, she saw that something had changed. The once grand, majestic gates of Azalar's royal palace were now darkened with soot, the towers that reached toward the heavens seemed shadowed and cold, and the air around the palace was thick with a sense of dread. The guards at the gates barely acknowledged her presence as she approached. Zuri's heart sank at the sight of them. These were the same guards she had once known as kind men who would smile and wave when they saw her. Now they stood with dark expressions, their faces as grim as the palace itself. She took a deep breath, her nerves on edge. There was no turning back now. "Excuse me," Zuri called, her voice steady despite the turmoil swirling in her chest. "I need to speak with King Arlen." The guards didn't respond immediately. They exchanged glances, then one of them finally spoke. "King Arlen has no time for visitors, least of all villagers," the guard said, his tone dismissive. Zuri's mind raced. What had happened to her kingdom? To her people? She felt the weight of her mission more keenly than ever. "I have a message from the River of Stars," Zuri said, her voice firm and unyielding. "It's urgent. The kingdom is dying and only the king can save it." The mention of the River of Stars seemed to stir something in the guards. One of them glanced nervously at the other, then nodded. "Wait here," he said, disappearing inside the palace gates. Zuri stood in silence, her eyes fixed on the darkened palace. She couldn't help but wonder what had happened to the kingdom. The once vibrant city, filled with joy and life, had become a hollow shell of itself. She could feel the magic of the river of stars pulsing in her chest, and she knew that time was running out. If the king didn't listen to her, the kingdom might be lost forever. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours before the guard returned. He motioned for her to follow, and Zuri stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. They walked through the palace halls, their footsteps echoing in the silence. It was colder inside the palace than it had been outside, and the air felt thick with despair. Zuri's eyes darted from one darkened room to another, but the palace seemed devoid of life. The once vibrant tapestries were now faded, and the furniture was covered in dust. Finally they reached a large set of double doors. The guard knocked once and then opened the doors, stepping aside to allow Zuri to enter. Inside, King Arlen sat at a grand throne, his face a mask of indifference. His once regal appearance had deteriorated, his hair graying and his posture slumped. His eyes, once full of wisdom and strength, were now cold and empty, like the kingdom he ruled. Zuri took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice steady, "I have come to speak to you about the River of Stars." King Arlen looked at her with a mix of curiosity and disdain. "The River of Stars?" he repeated, his voice cold. "What nonsense is this? The river no longer has any power. It's nothing but a myth." Zuri's heart sank at his words. She had expected him to be distant, but she hadn't expected him to be so dismissive. "The river is not a myth, Your Majesty," she said, her voice firm. "It is real and it still holds great power. The kingdom is dying and only the river can save it. You must release the stars you've hoarded and return the magic to the land." King Arlen's eyes narrowed. "I will not be lectured by a child," he spat. "I have taken the power of the river for myself, and I will not share it with anyone. The kingdom belongs to me." Zuri's heart pounded in her chest, but she did not falter. "The kingdom does not belong to you, King Arlen. It belongs to the people. And if you do not act, the River of Stars will disappear forever. The magic will be lost and the kingdom will fall into ruin." For a moment there was silence in the room. King Arlen's gaze softened ever so slightly, but he quickly masked it with a scowl. "You dare threaten me with the power of the river? I have no need for your childish warnings. Leave now before I have you thrown in the dungeons." Zuri stood tall, her hands clenched at her sides. She had expected resistance, but this was more than she could have imagined. "I am not leaving until you listen," she said, her voice filled with resolve. "The river has chosen me to restore balance. If you will not help, then I will do it without you." King Arlen laughed, a cold, mocking sound. "You are just a child. You think you can change anything?" Zuri didn't respond. She turned and walked toward the door, her heart heavy but her resolve unshaken. She had given the king the opportunity to change, but it seemed that he would not listen. The fate of the kingdom rested in her hands now, and she had no choice but to follow the path laid out for her. As she stepped outside the palace, the night air felt colder than before. The River of Stars still glimmered in the distance, its light a beacon in the darkness. Zuri knew what she had to do next. She had to find the true source of the river's magic and restore it before it was too late. Zuri walked away from the palace, the weight of King Arlen's words still heavy in her chest. She had tried to reason with him, but his greed was like a wall, cold and impenetrable. She had failed in her first attempt to change his heart, but something deep inside her told her that her journey was far from over. The night was quiet as Zuri made her way back toward the River of Stars. The air felt heavy with magic, and the path ahead seemed darker than it had been before. The stars above her twinkled with a distant, knowing light, as if watching over her. She clutched the glowing star in her pocket, its warmth comforting against her side. The forest around her was silent, the usual hum of nocturnal creatures absent. As she walked deeper into the woods, the path grew narrower, the trees more dense, and the air thicker with the scent of pine and earth. She felt as though the forest was alive, watching her every move. The ground beneath her feet was soft, the shadows deep, and the silence unnerving. Zuri had heard tales of the Forest of Whispers, an ancient and mysterious place where the trees themselves could speak, where the very air seemed to carry voices of the past. It was said that those who entered the forest would be tested by the spirits of the land, spiritual beings who guided the worthy and misled the unworthy. Zuri had never ventured this deep into the forest, and her heart began to race at the thought of what might lie ahead. As she pressed on, she heard a rustling in the underbrush. She stopped and listened, her breath held tight in her chest. The sound was faint, but it was growing closer. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. A tall, thin woman cloaked in a flowing robe made of silver threads that shimmered in the moonlight. Her face was obscured by a veil of mist, and her eyes glowed a soft, ethereal green. Zuri stepped back, startled by the sudden appearance of the woman. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice wary but curious. The woman did not respond at first. She simply stood there, her presence commanding yet peaceful. Then her voice came, soft as the wind but clear as day. "I am Leora, the guardian of the Forest of Whispers," the woman said. "And you, child of the river, have come seeking answers." Zuri's heart skipped a beat. She had heard of the guardians of the forest, but she had never expected to meet one. I'm looking for the River of Stars magic," Zuri said, trying to steady her voice. "I need to find the true source of its power before the kingdom falls." Leora's eyes seemed to pierce through her, as though she were reading Zuri's very soul. "The river has already chosen you, Zuri. But you must understand that your path will not be easy. The forces that have taken hold of your kingdom are not of this world. To restore the balance you will need more than just magic. You will need strength, wisdom, and courage. The journey ahead will test you in ways you cannot imagine." Zuri swallowed hard. The weight of Leora's words settled heavily on her shoulders, but she was determined. She had no choice but to continue. "I'm ready," she said, though doubt gnawed at her. Leora's gaze softened. "Very well. The path you must take lies ahead, but it will not be easy. You will be guided by the spirits of this forest, but you must be prepared for the trials that await you." Zuri nodded, though she still wasn't sure what trials the guardian spoke of. But before she could ask more, the ground beneath her feet trembled. The trees around her groaned as if alive, their branches twisting and turning, and the air seemed to thicken. Suddenly, the forest seemed to come alive with voices, whispers in a language Zuri did not understand. They echoed all around her, soft but persistent, like a chorus of unseen voices murmuring secrets to the wind. The ground before her cracked open, and out of the earth rose a great figure, tall and dark, with glowing red eyes that burned with an otherworldly fire. The figure was covered in shadow, its form shifting and changing with each passing moment. Zuri stepped back, fear rising in her chest. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "This is your first trial, child," Leora's voice echoed from somewhere within the mist. "The shadow of doubt. It feeds on your fear and your uncertainty. You must face it if you wish to move forward." Zuri's heart pounded in her chest as the shadow of doubt advanced toward her, its form shifting like smoke, its red eyes fixed on her with an almost predatory gleam. "You are nothing," the shadow hissed. "You are just a child. You cannot save the kingdom. You cannot even save yourself." Zuri felt a wave of doubt wash over her. The shadow's words struck deep into her heart, feeding on her insecurities. Could she really do this? Could she truly restore the balance to her kingdom? What if she failed? The shadow grew larger, its presence suffocating, and for a moment, Zuri felt as though she might collapse beneath the weight of it. But then a soft voice whispered within her, barely louder than a breath. "You are stronger than you know." It was the voice of her grandmother, the one who had always believed in her, the one who had taught her to be brave, even when the world seemed too big to face. Zuri stood tall, lifting her chin with newfound resolve. She clenched her fists, pushing back against the shadow's oppressive presence. "I am not afraid," she said, her voice steady despite the terror creeping at the edges of her mind. "I will save my kingdom. I will save the River of Stars." The shadow hissed and lunged toward her, but Zuri did not falter. She drew on the strength of her grandmother's voice, on the memories of all the people who had ever believed in her. She reached deep inside herself, pulling from the power of the River of Stars that pulsed within her heart. With a surge of energy, Zuri raised her hand, and the star in her pocket began to glow brighter than ever before. The shadow recoiled as if in pain, its form writhing in the light. Zuri focused all her will on the star, and with a final, powerful cry, she thrust it toward the shadow. The figure screamed, its form disintegrating into nothingness, and the whispers in the forest grew quiet. Zuri stood alone, panting, her body trembling from the intensity of the trial. But she had passed it. She had faced her doubts and overcome them. Leora appeared before her once more, her face calm but proud. "You have passed the first trial," she said. "But there will be more to come. You must continue your journey, and you must be prepared for what lies ahead." Zuri nodded, determination in her eyes. She had faced the shadow of doubt, and though the trials ahead would be difficult, she was ready. The path before her was still long, and the future uncertain, but she would not turn back now. The River of Stars had chosen her, and she would see her mission through, no matter the cost. Zuri's heart pounded in her chest as she stood in the aftermath of her victory over the shadow of doubt. The Forest of Whispers was eerily silent now, as though the very trees had been watching her, waiting for this moment. She could feel the residual energy of the trial still humming in the air around her, and the light from the star in her pocket seemed to pulse with a quiet, reassuring glow. Leora, the guardian of the forest, was silent for a moment, as if measuring Zuri's resolve before speaking. You have faced your doubts, child. But the trials ahead will not be as easy. The next test awaits you at the hidden cavern, deep within the heart of the forest. It is a place of darkness and temptation. The forces that reside within it are ancient, and they will test not only your strength but your very soul. Zuri felt a chill run through her, but she nodded. I am ready, she said, though her voice wavered slightly. After everything she had already faced, she wasn't entirely sure what ready meant anymore. Leora's expression softened, a flicker of something almost like compassion crossing her face. Very well, child. The hidden cavern lies to the east, past the silver springs. Follow the path through the mist of forgotten souls, but beware, what you encounter there may not always be what it seems. Zuri didn't hesitate. She thanked the guardian and began her journey once more, her feet steady and sure, though her mind was clouded with doubt. What was the hidden cavern? What forces lurked within it? And most importantly, would she be able to survive the next trial? The path took her deeper into the forest, where the trees grew denser and the air became thick with fog. The further she traveled, the darker it became. The trees towered above her, their roots like twisting serpents, and the sky overhead was hidden beneath a thick layer of clouds. Zuri felt as though the forest itself was closing in around her, but she pressed on, trusting in the guidance of the star and the whispers of the forest. As the hours passed, she arrived at the Silver Springs, a quiet, shimmering pool of water nestled between two ancient stone pillars. The water sparkled with an otherworldly light, and the air around the springs hummed with a low, melodic sound. It was beautiful, but Zuri could feel the subtle pull of something more powerful beneath the surface. She hesitated for only a moment before continuing, knowing that the hidden cavern was still ahead. As she passed the Silver Springs, she entered a dense fog that rose up from the earth like smoke, obscuring the path ahead. The mist of forgotten souls, Leora had called it. The mist swirled around her, thick and disorienting. Zuri could barely see her own hand in front of her face, and the air felt colder now, as though the very fog was alive, trying to suffocate her. In the distance, she thought she heard whispers, soft voices carried by the wind, indistinguishable and haunting. She strained to listen, but the words were lost in the fog. As she pressed on, a figure appeared before her, tall, draped in shadows. It was a man, his face obscured by a dark hood. He stood motionless, his hands clasped in front of him. Zuri felt a shiver crawl up her spine. Who are you? She demanded, her voice steady but wary. The figure raised his head slowly, revealing eyes that glowed with an unnatural light, pale blue, like the ice of the farthest north. I am the keeper of the forgotten. The man's voice was deep, yet it echoed like a chorus of many voices. I guard the way to the hidden cavern. Few have passed through here. Tell me, what is it you seek? Zuri's heart raced. She had not been expecting another obstacle so soon. The keeper's presence was oppressive, as if the very air had grown heavier around her. I seek the truth, Zuri said, standing tall. I seek the power of the river of stars to save my kingdom. The keeper's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes shimmered with an odd intensity. Ah, the river of stars. Many have sought it, few have found it, and fewer still have returned from its depths. What makes you believe you can succeed where others have failed? Zuri took a deep breath, summoning the courage that had carried her thus far. Because I am not just seeking power. I am seeking to restore balance, to save the people I love. I carry the light of the river within me. The keeper studied her for a long moment, his piercing gaze weighing her words. Then, with a gesture of his hand, the fog seemed to clear slightly, revealing the path ahead. The hidden cavern is a place of great darkness, the keeper said, his voice low. It holds the power to tempt and destroy. If you are truly prepared to face it, you must walk the path alone. There is no room for hesitation, no place for doubt. Zuri nodded, though her heart was heavy with uncertainty. I understand. The keeper stepped aside, allowing her to pass. As she walked forward, the fog lifted completely, revealing a narrow path that wound through the thick trees. The air grew colder, and a sense of foreboding settled over her, but Zuri kept moving forward, determined to face whatever lay ahead. After what seemed like hours, she reached the mouth of the hidden cavern, a dark opening in the earth, its edges jagged and uneven. The air around it was thick with a sense of dread, and Zuri could feel the presence of something ancient and powerful just beyond the entrance. She hesitated, but only for a moment. The river of stars within her burned brightly, a steady, comforting glow. She stepped into the cavern, the darkness swallowing her whole. Inside, the cavern was vast and oppressive, the walls slick with moisture. Strange, glowing fungi illuminated the space in an eerie, greenish light, casting long shadows that seemed to dance in the corners. The air was thick with an ancient magic, and Zuri felt as though the very ground beneath her feet was alive, breathing with an old, forgotten power. As she ventured deeper into the cavern, she saw the first of the trials before her, a series of large stone pillars, each inscribed with ancient symbols. The pillars seemed to glow faintly, their surfaces covered in intricate runes that Zuri didn't recognize. Suddenly the ground shook and the stones trembled. A deep rumble echoed through the cavern and a low growl filled the air. Zuri turned toward the source of the sound and saw a massive creature emerging from the shadows. A serpent-like creature, its scales shimmering like obsidian, its eyes glowing with an ominous light. "Only those who are worthy may pass," the creature hissed. "Only those who face their greatest fears may continue." Zuri froze, her heart pounding. She had faced doubts and shadows before, but this was different. This creature was the embodiment of fear itself, and it was staring directly at her, waiting. "You must face me," the creature snarled. "Defeat me and the path to your goal will be clear. Fail and you will be lost forever." Zuri's breath caught in her throat. This was the second trial, the trial of fear. And she had no choice but to face it. Zuri's body tensed as the serpent's glowing eyes locked onto hers. The creature's massive form coiled around the cavern, its scales gleaming like dark jewels in the eerie light. The walls of the cavern seemed to close in, and the air grew thick with the pressure of anticipation. The serpent's voice echoed in the darkness, deep and rumbling, like thunder in the distance. "I am the embodiment of fear, child. You cannot pass unless you confront me, unless you confront your own deepest, darkest fear." Zuri swallowed, her breath shallow and uneven. She had faced many trials already, the shadow of doubt, the whispering forest. But this was different. Fear had always been a part of her, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to strike. "What do you want from me?" Zuri asked, her voice stronger than she felt. She wasn't sure what the creature wanted. Was it going to attack? Or was this another test, one of strength or perhaps of willpower? The serpent's head lowered, its slithering motion causing the ground to tremble slightly. "I will show you your greatest fear," it hissed, its voice now laced with a strange, hypnotic tone. "I will take you to the place you fear most, and there you will face your terror." Zuri's heart raced. What could it mean? Her mind raced, thinking back to the darkness of the trials she had faced. Was it her failure she feared? The idea of disappointing her kingdom, her family? Or was it something even deeper, a part of her past she had buried long ago? Before she could form another thought, the cavern around her shifted. The walls trembled and groaned as though the very stone was alive. The air thickened, and the dim glow from the mushrooms lining the walls flickered before going out completely. Zuri blinked, and suddenly the darkness seemed to swallow her whole. The world around her twisted. The ground beneath her feet became soft and unstable, as if the earth itself had turned to quicksand. Her feet sank deeper with each step she took, and a sense of dread washed over her like a wave. The distant sounds of a child crying echoed in the void. A voice, young, desperate, and familiar. It was her own voice calling out in pain. Her stomach churned and she tried to scream, but no sound came out. She found herself standing in a familiar place, the village from her childhood. Only now it was different. The houses were in ruins, the streets empty, the sky a sickly orange. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of smoke and decay. In the distance she could see her mother, the woman who had raised her with love and care. But now her mother was crouched, her face hidden in her hands. The figure of her mother seemed wrong, like a broken version of the woman Zuri had known. "Mother?" Zuri cried out, but the words caught in her throat. She tried to move toward her, but her body felt frozen in place. No matter how hard she tried to step forward, she couldn't move. The scene around her seemed to distort and twist further, until the air itself grew thick with shadows. She heard the whispers again, low, guttural voices that seemed to echo from the very depths of her soul. "You could not save her. You are too weak. You are not worthy." Zuri's eyes filled with tears, but she fought to keep her composure. She was being forced to relive the moment she had feared most. The moment her mother had been taken from her, the day when her village had been destroyed in a raid. She had been helpless then, too young and too powerless to do anything. "You couldn't even protect your own?" The words cut into her like daggers. The shadows shifted, and Zuri could see the twisted figures of the invaders, the ones who had taken everything from her. They loomed over her, their faces obscured by dark, hooded cloaks. The fear, the helplessness, it all came rushing back. But then something inside her stirred. She clenched her fists, fighting against the terror that held her in place. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling but growing stronger. "I will not be weak." The air around her seemed to thicken, as if the very atmosphere was pressing against her. But in the center of her chest, the star, her star, began to glow brighter. It was a warmth, a fire, that spread through her veins like a force of pure light. "You will not define me," she said, her voice now steady and filled with a newfound power. The shadows shied away from her light, and she could feel the pull of the darkness loosening. The fear that had once held her prisoner was no longer something she had to run from. Instead, it became something she could confront, something she could overcome. Zuri lifted her head, staring straight ahead at the distorted image of her mother. The woman was still crying, but now her tears were not tears of sorrow, they were tears of hope, of faith. Zuri took a step forward. Then another. The ground beneath her solidified, the darkness receding with each movement. "I am not powerless," Zuri said, her voice carrying with it the strength of 1,000 warriors. "I am not my fears. I am the one who will stand, who will fight, and who will protect." The serpent's shadowy form loomed behind her, watching in silence as she approached the image of her mother. But now the creature seemed smaller, its presence less intimidating. The cavern trembled once more, but this time, it was a tremor of defeat. Zuri reached out and gently touched her mother's shoulder. The figure, once broken, now turned to her. Her mother's face was soft and loving, a smile of pride crossing her lips. "You are not alone, my child," her mother whispered. "You have the strength to overcome anything." With that, the vision faded, the twisted shadows evaporating like smoke. Zuri found herself back in the hidden cavern, standing alone before the serpent, now much smaller and less menacing. The walls of the cavern no longer seemed to close in around her. The serpent bowed its head, the dark magic that had once filled the space now dissipating into the air. "You have faced your fear and conquered it. You are worthy to continue." Zuri took a deep breath, her heart still pounding in her chest, but now filled with a sense of peace. She had faced the darkness within her and emerged stronger. As the serpent slithered back into the shadows, Zuri knew that her journey was far from over, but she was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. With the light of the star in her pocket and the strength of her will, she would face whatever trials the hidden cavern and the journey beyond had in store. Zuri stood at the edge of a tranquil, mist-covered lake, the air cool and crisp. The water's surface shimmered under the pale light of the full moon, casting an ethereal glow across the cavern. For the first time in her journey, she felt a sense of calm, a brief respite from the trials that had pushed her to the brink. But this tranquility was deceptive, for Zuri knew that every place in the hidden cavern had its own challenge, and the lake was no different. A soft ripple disturbed the stillness of the water, and a voice, low, soft, and melodious, rose from the depths. "Zuri, you have come far, but you must now face the depths of your soul." Zuri's breath hitched. This voice was unlike the serpent's, unlike the shadows, yet it carried with it the weight of something ancient and wise. She turned toward the water, her gaze drawn to the rippling surface. The voice beckoned her closer. "Who speaks?" Zuri asked, her voice steady, though doubt clung to her heart. "I am the guardian of the lake," the voice replied. "The lake of reflections holds the truth of all who seek it. But be warned, this truth can either free you or bind you forever." Zuri took a tentative step forward, her feet sinking into the soft earth beneath her. The surface of the water began to glow brighter, as if responding to her presence. A series of shimmering images danced across the lake, swirling and shifting in the water like forgotten memories. "I have already faced fear and doubt," Zuri said. "What more could this place reveal?" "The Lake of Reflections does not deal in the realm of fear or doubt," the voice said, its tone shifting to something more solemn. "Here you will see the truth of who you are, stripped of all the masks you wear and the lies you tell yourself. What you will see is not a reflection of your fears, but of your deepest truths. And not all truths are kind." Zuri's heart pounded as the lake's surface began to ripple again. A dark, swirling vortex appeared in the center of the water, a doorway to something unknown. The voice from the depths spoke again, softer now, almost as if it were warning her. "Are you ready to face the truth, Zuri?" The question lingered in the air. Zuri hesitated. She had already faced so much, her fear, her doubt, her failures. But could she truly face her innermost truths? The ones she had hidden even from herself? Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, allowing herself to fall into the swirling vortex of water. Zuri was plunged into an overwhelming darkness. The chill of the water surrounded her like 1,000 hands, pressing against her skin. She could feel herself being pulled deeper, farther away from the world she knew. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the water seemed to dissipate, and Zuri found herself standing on a familiar path. She was no longer in the hidden cavern. The place around her was bright, bathed in sunlight. The path stretched before her, lined with tall, bending trees, their leaves rustling in the soft breeze. The air smelled sweet, almost like her childhood home, warm, inviting, and filled with memories. At the end of the path stood a figure, a tall, regal woman whose face was hidden in the shadows of a hooded cloak. But Zuri knew who it was. Her heart skipped a beat. It was her mother. "Mother," Zuri whispered, stepping toward the figure. The woman didn't turn, but Zuri could feel her presence as if it were all-encompassing. Every step she took toward her mother felt like a journey home. Her mother had always been the beacon of strength, love, and guidance for her. Zuri had looked up to her with unwavering admiration. But as she reached out, the figure turned. Zuri's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't her mother's face that looked back at her. It was her own. The reflection in the figure's eyes was unmistakable, Zuri's own face, yet somehow older, hardened by experiences she hadn't yet lived. The eyes staring back at her were filled with a deep, aching sadness. The woman, no Zuri, looked at her with a piercing gaze. "Why are you here?" Zuri asked, her voice breaking slightly. The reflection didn't speak. Instead, it reached out, gently brushing Zuri's cheek with a cool hand. Zuri could feel the weight of the touch, like the weight of years spent longing for something she had lost. "You know who I am," the reflection whispered. "You've always known." The words hung in the air like a riddle. Zuri's pulse quickened. "What is this? What does it mean?" The reflection smiled softly, the expression both sad and knowing. "This is the truth you cannot escape. This is the truth you refuse to see." And in that moment, Zuri understood. The woman before her was not just a reflection of her mother, nor was it simply an image of herself from the future. It was a vision of what she feared most, a future where she had become someone she didn't recognize. Someone who had failed to live up to the woman her mother had been, to the person her kingdom needed. A future where she was consumed by her own doubt, by the weight of her responsibilities. Her deepest fear was not losing her family or her kingdom, it was failing herself. Becoming the very thing she feared, weak, indecisive, and broken by the trials she had faced. The reflection stepped closer, the sorrow in its eyes deepening. "You've spent so long running from who you are. Running from the weight of your own power. The question isn't whether you are strong enough, Zuri," the reflection said softly. "The question is whether you are ready to accept your strength." Zuri felt the sting of the words, like a blade slicing through her heart. She had always tried to be everything for everyone, daughter, warrior, leader, but she had never truly accepted what she was capable of. She had always held back, afraid that if she embraced her full potential, she would become something she couldn't control. Her hands trembled and she looked down at her star, her symbol of strength and hope. It had always been a guide, a beacon, but now it felt heavier in her hands. The reflection's voice softened further. "Only when you embrace your own power will you truly be free. You can't carry the weight of the world by yourself. You were never meant to." The darkness around them seemed to shift, the bright sunlight fading. Zuri felt the pressure of the air around her, heavy with her own guilt and self-doubt. The figure of herself began to fade, the moment slipping away. But as it did, the voice remained, echoing in her mind. "Accept yourself, Zuri. Embrace your power. Only then will you be ready to face what lies ahead." Zuri awoke with a start, her body trembling, her breath shallow. The lake was still before her, the mist swirling in the moonlight. For a moment she didn't know where she was. She blinked, disoriented, the remnants of the vision still hanging in her mind. The guardian's voice spoke again, softer now, almost reassuring. "You have seen the truth, child. The truth you must face. But remember, it is not the truth that will bind you. It is the choice you make." Zuri nodded, taking a deep breath. She knew now what she had to do. She was not just a warrior. She was not just a daughter or a leader. She was all of those things and more. But most importantly, she was Zuri. And she had the power to shape her own future. The lake's surface grew calm once more, and the voice of the guardian faded into the distance. Zuri turned away from the lake, her heart lighter but filled with resolve. She was ready. Ready to face whatever trials came next, because now she knew who she was. And nothing could stop her. The path ahead was growing more treacherous with every step. The mist that had once shrouded Zuri's journey had begun to thin, revealing the jagged rocks and steep cliffs that bordered the next challenge. There was no turning back now, the trials had only just begun. She had passed the Lake of Reflections, but the hidden cavern held many more secrets. Secrets that would test her resolve, her courage, and the strength of her spirit. The ground beneath her feet grew warmer, and the air shimmered with heat. Zuri squinted against the rising warmth, a steady pressure building within her chest. A distant rumble echoed through the cavern, reverberating off the walls like the roar of a storm on the horizon. She felt it before she saw it, a faint tremor underfoot, followed by the unmistakable glow of molten light. Ahead of her, the cavern opened into a vast chamber, its walls lined with veins of burning red. At its center, a pool of lava bubbled and churned, sending up bursts of fire that illuminated the darkness around her. The fiery glow made everything appear surreal, as though the world itself were ablaze. In the center of the chamber stood an imposing figure, a being of flame, its form flickering in and out of existence like a living inferno. It was tall, its body formed entirely of fire, with glowing orange eyes that seemed to pierce through the heat. Its voice, when it spoke, was like the crackle of burning wood, deep and resonant. "You have come to the trial of fire, Zuri," it boomed, its voice shaking the ground beneath her. "Here you will face not just the flames of this realm, but the flames within yourself." Zuri stood firm, the warmth of the fire licking at her skin. She was no stranger to hardship, but this was something different. The trial of fire was known to be one of the most dangerous challenges in the hidden cavern, where the test was not physical, but spiritual. She would be forced to confront the inner fire, the passions, desires, and anger that had always burned within her, whether she acknowledged them or not. "I am ready," Zuri said, her voice steady despite the rising heat. She had faced the Lake of Reflections and had confronted her deepest fears. She would not falter now. The fire spirit let out a low, mocking laugh. "Ready? You are but a mere child playing at being a leader. Do you truly believe you can withstand the fire that lies within you?" Zuri's chest tightened at the words. She had always been quick to temper, driven by emotions that she sometimes didn't fully understand. Anger, frustration, guilt, they had always been there, simmering just beneath the surface. But she had learned much on her journey so far. She had learned to control her fear, her doubts. Now she had to learn to control the fire within her. The fire spirit stepped forward, its molten hands outstretched. "This is the trial of fire. You will walk through the flames. Only those who can control their inner fire will emerge unscathed." Without waiting for her response, the spirit unleashed a wave of fire toward her. The flames roared through the air like an unstoppable force, burning bright with a heat that made Zuri's skin prickle. The flames shot toward her, and in that moment she had a choice, to fight the fire head-on or to find another way. Zuri closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. She had always been impulsive, acting on the emotions that surged within her, never fully considering the consequences. She had fought with the flames of her own anger, burning those around her, even when it wasn't their fault. But this trial was not about fighting the fire. It was about learning to control it. As the flames neared, Zuri felt the heat on her skin. She didn't raise her hands to fight or shield herself, but instead she closed her eyes and focused inward, reaching deep within herself. She felt the fire, the anger, the frustration, the power that had always bubbled inside her. It was wild and untamed, threatening to consume her. But now she understood. It was a part of her, not an enemy to be destroyed, but a force to be channeled. With her eyes still closed, Zuri extended her hands forward, feeling the pulse of the fire around her. She whispered a silent prayer to herself, asking for strength, for control. "Calm," she whispered. "Calm the storm within me." The fire spirit laughed, sensing her hesitation. "You think you can control me, girl? You think you can control the fire? It is in your blood. It is in your soul. You cannot escape it." But Zuri held firm, focusing on the fire inside her. Slowly, like a river being dammed, the flames began to recede. She could feel the heat, but it no longer threatened to overwhelm her. It was as if she were no longer fighting the fire, but dancing with it. The fire spirit, sensing her strength, hesitated for a moment. Zuri opened her eyes. The flames around her had faded into a gentle warmth, no longer fierce or threatening. The fire spirit's molten eyes narrowed, its form flickering with surprise. You have controlled it," the fire spirit murmured. "You have tamed the flames. You are stronger than I thought." Zuri stood tall, her body still feeling the heat of the trial, but she was not afraid. She had faced the fire within herself and emerged victorious. I have learned to control it, she said, her voice steady and sure. It is not about denying the fire. It is about understanding it and using it for a greater purpose. The fire spirit bowed its head, its form flickering one last time before it dissolved into the air, leaving only the warmth behind. The trial was complete. As the fire faded, Zuri stood alone in the chamber, her heart pounding with the remnants of the challenge. The air was still thick with heat, but now it felt comforting. The weight of the trial had lifted, and Zuri knew that she had passed, but not without a deeper understanding of herself. The trial of fire had not just tested her ability to control the flames around her, but also the fire within her spirit. It had shown her that her emotions, her anger, her passion, her drive, were not weaknesses. They were powerful forces, and when controlled, they could be used to fuel her journey, not destroy it. Zuri took a deep breath, feeling the fire settle within her. She was no longer afraid of it. She had embraced it, learned from it, and emerged stronger because of it. Her journey was far from over. There were still trials ahead. But Zuri knew one thing for sure now: she was ready for whatever came next. The air had grown colder as Zuri ventured deeper into the hidden cavern. The fiery warmth from the trial of fire still lingered in her skin, but ahead of her, the cavern's atmosphere shifted. The heat was replaced by a chilling, oppressive cold, as though the very walls of the cavern were closing in, suffocating her in shadows. Zuri stepped cautiously, her senses heightened. The flames of the last trial had illuminated her path, but now only darkness surrounded her. The further she walked, the harder it became to see, until even the faint light from the previous chambers was swallowed by an unyielding blackness. Her footsteps echoed unervingly against the stone, the sound of her own breath, quick and shallow, the only thing she could hear. A low whisper reached her ears, a voice that seemed to come from every direction, faint but filled with malice. "Zuri?" She stopped, her heart skipping a beat. The voice was unsettling, like the cold touch of ice on her skin. She reached out, trying to find her bearings, but all she felt was the suffocating, heavy darkness pressing in on her. The shadows seemed alive, flickering at the edge of her vision, moving with an intelligence that made her skin crawl. "Zuri?" The voice came again, this time closer, like a breath against her ear. It was no longer just a whisper, but a beckoning, calling her name with an eerie familiarity. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to stay calm. She could feel the weight of the darkness, the heaviness of fear trying to settle in her chest. This was the trial of shadows, the trial that would test her courage in the face of her own inner fears. She had heard whispers of this trial from those who had journeyed before her, but she had never imagined it would feel this real. The shadows around her were no longer just a lack of light. They were growing, twisting into shapes that loomed over her, their forms indistinct but menacing. They seemed to pulse as if breathing, and Zuri could feel their weight pressing on her shoulders. They were closing in on her, surrounding her in a vast, unseen expanse. She took a deep breath and focused, reaching for the lessons she had learned in the previous trials. She had confronted her inner fire, her doubts, and her anger. Now it was time to face the darkness within herself, the fear, the insecurities, the shadows of her past that haunted her thoughts. Suddenly the shadows coalesced into a figure, a dark, shifting mass of smoke and mist. It was a familiar shape, though distorted. As it took form, Zuri's heart dropped. You're not real," Zuri whispered to herself. The figure standing before her was a twisted reflection of herself, tall, with long, flowing hair, but the face was empty, hollow. There were no eyes, no features, just a smooth, black surface like a mask. It reached out to her with long, ghostly arms. "I am you," the shadow said in a voice that sounded like her own. "I am the part of you that you fear to face. The darkness you wish to forget." Zuri recoiled, stepping back, her breath quickening as the shadow's grip seemed to stretch out to her. "No," she said firmly. "You're not me. You're the fear I left behind." The shadow only smiled, its black lips curling into an eerie grin. "I am the voice of doubt, the whisper of insecurity, the memory of every mistake you've ever made. Do you think you can escape me, Zuri? Do you think you can escape yourself?" Zuri's heart thudded in her chest. The fear was overwhelming, the voice of the shadow weaving through her thoughts like a cold, creeping fog. It was true, she had lived her life afraid. Afraid of failing, afraid of the choices she had made, afraid that she was not strong enough to be the leader her people needed. Her mind flashed back to her childhood, to the moments when she had felt small and powerless, when she had been told she was not enough. To the mistakes she had made as she struggled to find her place in the world. The shadow was right, she had spent so long running from these feelings, trying to outrun the darkness. But now the darkness was here, staring her in the face. "I've already faced the fire," Zuri said, her voice shaking at first but gaining strength. "I've faced my rage, my anger. And I won't let you control me anymore. You are a part of me, but you don't define me." The shadow laughed, a hollow, empty sound. It seemed to grow taller, its form becoming more monstrous. "You think you can defeat me, Zuri? You think you can defeat yourself?" The walls of the cavern began to shake, and Zuri felt the weight of the shadow pressing in on her, trying to consume her. The figure loomed over her, its black hands reaching for her, but she stood her ground. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, drawing on the strength she had gained throughout her journey. She remembered the lessons of the past, the fire that had once threatened to consume her, the fear that had nearly paralyzed her. But she had learned that these things were not her enemies. They were parts of her, parts she could embrace, control, and use to fuel her future. "You are not my enemy," Zuri whispered, her voice steady now. "I will not let you control me. I will not let you define who I am. I am more than my fears." As she spoke the words, something changed. The shadow faltered, its form rippling as though it were being pulled in different directions. Zuri could feel its power slipping away, melting under the light of her conviction. With a surge of strength, Zuri raised her hand, and the shadow recoiled. The walls of the cavern began to light up with a faint, shimmering glow, as if the darkness itself was being pushed back by her will. The shadow writhed, its form becoming smaller and smaller, until it was nothing more than a wisp of smoke fading into the air. Zuri stood tall, her chest rising and falling as she took in the victory. She had faced the darkest parts of herself, the doubts, the insecurities, and had overcome them. The shadows in the cavern began to retreat, leaving behind only the soft glow of light, and the oppressive weight in her chest lifted. She had faced her deepest fears and conquered them, not by destroying them but by accepting them, learning from them, and mastering them. As the darkness faded, Zuri found herself standing in the center of the cavern, alone but empowered. The trial of shadows had tested her courage and forced her to face the parts of herself she had tried to avoid. But now she understood that she was not defined by her fears. She was defined by how she chose to confront them. With the trial of shadows behind her, Zuri felt stronger than ever before. She had passed the fire and the darkness. What came next would be the ultimate test. Zuri stood at the edge of the cavern, her heart still racing from the trial of shadows. The cavern's ominous darkness had been replaced by a soft, golden light that seemed to emanate from the very stones beneath her feet. It felt like the world had shifted somehow, as if the trials she had endured were not just challenges, but markers on the path to her true purpose. Her body ached from the strain, but her spirit was strong, filled with a newfound sense of clarity. The fears she had carried with her for so long had been stripped away, and in their place, there was nothing but resolve. The light ahead of her pulsed with promise, as though beckoning her forward. But there was something else in the air now, a presence. It was not the oppressive weight of the shadows or the fire that had burned through her resolve. This was different. It felt like destiny. Zuri took a deep breath and stepped forward. The stone beneath her feet hummed with energy, and the light grew brighter, blinding her for a moment. When her eyes adjusted, she found herself standing before a massive stone door, adorned with intricate carvings that shimmered with an ethereal glow. It seemed both ancient and timeless, its surface etched with symbols that she had never seen before, yet somehow they felt familiar. The door was ajar, just wide enough for her to slip through. She hesitated for a moment, her hand resting on the cool stone. Was this it? The final trial? Or had she just stumbled upon something far greater than she could have imagined? As if in answer, a voice echoed from within, calm and serene yet carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "Zuri, the chosen one, come forward." The voice seemed to wrap around her like a warm breeze, urging her onward. There was no fear in it, only a sense of inevitability, as though she had always been meant to walk this path. With a deep, steadying breath, Zuri crossed the threshold. The moment she stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind her, sealing her in a vast, dome-like chamber. The air here was thick with power, the walls adorned with symbols of all the trials she had endured, fire, shadows, and even the wisdom she had gained along the way. But now it was different. The room was alive with energy, as though the very space was a living entity, watching, waiting for her. And then, in the center of the room, she saw it. A pedestal stood before her, bathed in the same golden light that seemed to emanate from the chamber itself. Upon the pedestal was a crystal, glowing softly, its surface swirling with colors that defied explanation. It pulsed gently, as though breathing in sync with Zuri's own heartbeat. It was beautiful, powerful. And yet, Zuri knew without a doubt that it was not merely a symbol. This was the heart of the trial, the final challenge, the source of all the power she had been seeking. This is the heart of destiny, the voice spoke again, and this time, it seemed to come from everywhere at once. It holds the power to change the course of your people's fate. But to wield it, you must first understand your true purpose. Zuri's pulse quickened. She had come so far, endured so much, but this was unlike anything she had ever imagined. The power in the crystal was undeniable, almost overwhelming. It was more than just magic. It was the embodiment of every choice, every possibility, every thread of fate that had led her here. She took another step forward, drawn to the pedestal, her eyes fixed on the crystal. It was calling to her. But as her hand reached for it, the voice spoke once more. What will you choose, Zuri? Will you claim this power for yourself, or will you leave it behind? The fate of your people lies in your hands. This is not a test of strength nor of courage. This is a test of the heart. Zuri froze. The weight of the voice's words sank deep into her chest. It was a test of the heart. Not her physical strength or her willpower, but her ability to choose. She thought back to all the choices she had made in her life, the time she had been forced to lead, to act quickly, to make decisions that impacted not only her own future but the futures of those around her. There had been times when she had been selfish, unsure of her abilities, torn between doing what was right and what was easy. She had failed in the past, and there were still scars from those failures. But there were also moments of triumph. Moments when she had risen above her fears, when she had put others first, when she had acted with integrity and purpose. Zuri glanced back at the crystal. Its glow seemed to grow stronger, more insistent, urging her to take it, to claim its power. But with that power came responsibility, a responsibility that would shape the future of her people. She closed her eyes, steadying her breath. She had made it this far. And now she would make the choice that would define her destiny. I choose my people, Zuri said softly, her voice steady and unwavering. In that moment the room seemed to hold its breath. The crystal pulsed once more, and then, without warning, a beam of light shot from its core, enveloping Zuri in a blinding glow. She felt it, every ounce of energy, every strand of power coursing through her veins, filling her with strength and clarity. The voice spoke again, this time with a sense of finality. You have chosen wisely, Zuri. The heart of destiny now belongs to you, but remember, its power is not for you alone. It will only work when used for the good of others. Be humble in your choices, wise in your actions, and always lead with compassion. The light faded, and Zuri found herself standing in the center of the chamber, the crystal now nestled in the palm of her hand. The warmth of its energy radiated from her, but it was a warmth that did not burn. It was soothing, comforting, and empowering. She had made her choice, and with it she had embraced her true purpose. But this was not the end. It was only the beginning. Zuri stood alone in the heart of the chamber, the crystal now nestled firmly in her grasp. Its light still hummed softly, filling the space with a gentle energy that seemed to pulse in tune with her heartbeat. The weight of the moment was not lost on her. She had made the choice, she had chosen her people, their future over her own desires, and now the true test was about to begin. The voice that had guided her thus far remained silent, but its presence lingered in the air. Zuri felt as though the very fabric of the world was watching her, awaiting her next move. The power in her hand was both a gift and a burden. With it, she could shape the destiny of her people, of her land, of the world. But it would require wisdom. It would demand sacrifice. You have done well, Zuri, the voice finally spoke, calm but heavy with meaning. Now, it is time to return to your people and fulfill the promise of your heart. Zuri nodded, feeling the weight of the words sink deep into her. She had walked the trials. She had faced her fears. She had chosen to lead with her heart, to put others before herself. And now, with the heart of destiny in her hand, she would guide her people to a future that had once seemed impossible. But first she needed to leave the chamber. The door behind her, which had once been closed, now creaked open of its own accord as though welcoming her. Zuri hesitated for a moment, one last time, before stepping out of the room that had become the cradle of her transformation. The moment she crossed the threshold, the world outside seemed different. The skies were brighter, the air sweeter, and the land before her seemed to glow with an almost magical radiance. The trials had changed her, but they had also changed the world around her. There was a new energy in the air, a shift that rippled through the very earth beneath her feet. Zuri walked steadily, her heart resolute. She had known from the very beginning that this day would come, that her path would lead her here. And now, as she neared the village, she could see the figures standing at the edges of the fields, their eyes turned toward her. Word had spread of her success, of the trials she had endured, and the power she now held. The villagers had gathered, waiting for their leader to return, waiting for the one who would change their world. As she walked toward them, their eyes filled with hope, their faces filled with expectation, Zuri felt something inside her stir. It wasn't fear. It wasn't doubt. It was love. Love for the people who had always stood by her, who had believed in her even when she could not believe in herself. She reached the center of the village, where the elders and leaders had gathered. They watched her in silence, their eyes searching, waiting to see if she would deliver on the promise she had made. The weight of their expectations rested on her shoulders, but she did not falter. With a deep breath, Zuri raised the crystal high above her head. Its light pulsed once more, brighter than ever before, casting a golden glow across the gathered crowd. "The trials are over," Zuri spoke, her voice carrying across the village. "The heart of destiny is mine, and it belongs to all of us. We will use its power to build a future where every person, every soul has a place. We will protect our land. We will nurture the earth. We will ensure that no one is left behind." The villagers erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the valley. It was a sound of pure joy, of relief and of hope. Zuri smiled, her heart swelling with pride, but also with a quiet understanding that the true work was only just beginning. As the sun began to set, casting its last rays over the horizon, Zuri turned to the elders. "Together," she said, her eyes gleaming with determination, "we will create a council. We will work side by side with the people so that every voice is heard. This is not a rule from one, but a guiding light for all." And so the council was formed. Zuri and the elders, alongside the village leaders, began their work in earnest, using the power of the heart of destiny to heal the land, to restore balance to the earth, and to ensure that every person, no matter their station or background, had access to the resources they needed to thrive. Months passed and the village flourished. The land, once barren and dry, began to bloom again, with crops growing in abundance and the rivers flowing clean. The people worked together, united by the power Zuri had unlocked, but more importantly, united by the love they had for one another. Zuri's wisdom guided them through every decision. She listened to the people, making sure their voices were always heard. She was no longer just a leader, she was a symbol of hope, a beacon for the future. She had become the heart of her people, just as she had promised. And as time passed, the stories of Zuri's journey, of her trials, of her courage and wisdom, spread beyond the village across the lands. People came from far and wide to see the miracles she had worked, to learn from her, and to carry the message of unity and compassion to their own lands. But Zuri knew that her journey was not yet over. The heart of destiny had unlocked the potential for change, but it was up to the people to carry that change forward. It was up to them to build a world that would last, one founded on love, on equality, and on the belief that every person had a purpose. And so, the legacy of Zuri and the heart of destiny lived on, passed down through the generations as a reminder that even the smallest of hearts, when filled with the power of love and compassion, could change the world.